Great. Well, I think we'll just go ahead and get started, and Suki can join us when she calls in. So first, I really wanted to thank everyone for really being a part of this. For those who we've asked to speak, I'll introduce them later, and we'll just kind of go around and do introductions. But this whole webinar sort of conference call platform came about because David and Xander from the city of Rockland was interested in adopting a single-use bag ordinance in their city. And so we kind of thought, why not bring some of the folks from our different member communities together to kind of talk about their successes or their challenges and how they met those challenges. And here we are today. We also have Stu Silverstein from Waterville, who's also in the process or interested in adopting a single-use bag ordinance in Waterville as well. So those are kind of our main attendees. I just want to remind everybody really quick, I know I said that in the, it was stated in the agenda, but the webinar itself is recorded and so is everyone's input. So after this is over, we'll sort of clean it up, send it to everybody, you can review it, and if you want anything that you say omitted, we can do that before publishing it on our website or social media or on YouTube, which is, I think we might publish this on YouTube, on our YouTube channel. So, for speakers, I have myself. I'm the sustainability materials management graduate trainee here at ecomaine. And then Suki's not here yet. We have, I don't know if everyone just kind of wants to, well, I guess for our speakers, we have Suki Rice, who's the vice chair of Freeport's Sustainability Committee. Kathy Nichols, she's the chair of the Falmouth Recycling, Energy and Advisory Committee. She'll be talking about the efforts done in Falmouth. Kara Lavender Law, she's on Cape Elizabeth's Recycling Committee, and Matthew Faulkner is also on the Cape Elizabeth Recycling Committee, but also had played a major role in the Portland Ordinance, so he'll be talking about that a little later today as well. And yeah, if everyone just kind of, we'll start with maybe Lisa, if you want to introduce yourself and
Sure. So my name is Lisa Wolf, and I'm the communications manager here at ecomaine. So thank you, everybody, for being part of it. Katrina? Do you want to introduce yourself, Katrina? You're on mute.
Hi, I'm Katrina. I'm the environmental educator at ecomaine.
Kara. Stu.
Hi, I'm Stu Silverstein from Waterville, and we're in the middle of working on an ordinance banning single-use plastic bags.
Great. I don't know if the folks in Rockland kind of want to introduce themselves.
I'm Xander Shaw, and I guess I'm the chair of a group we call Waste Watchers, which is part of a larger group called Renew Rockland, and we work closely with the city on waste reduction and recycling programs. And I'll let maybe everyone else introduce themselves quickly.
I'm Sarah, I'm part of Waste Watchers.
Lawrence, part of Waste Watchers.
Oh, me? I'm Ed Glazer, and I am on the Rockland City Council, and we hope to approve something really quickly.
I'm Dave St. Laurent. I'm the Public Services Director for the City of Rockland.
Great.
And that's all of us.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I'm a few people are cut out in my screen, so I can't see everybody. But well, welcome, and yeah, I'm glad everyone was able to make it, and especially those who will be speaking today. So I guess we'll just jump right in. Okay. So just to review, we're going to cover, it's going to kind of go in 4 parts. One is going to be, why adopt a single-use bag ordinance. Then we'll review the types of ordinances and some of the different it's kind of convenient because almost every single community representative we have here today has a different type of ordinance. So it'll be great to get those different perspectives on, why they chose that ordinance and how it's working for them. And then we'll go over drafting an ordinance, what the process is for that, some of the language used. And then we'll talk about community engagement, which is obviously a huge piece into having a very successful ordinance and follow through. And then at the end, I think I stated that the last 30 minutes or so will be just Q&A. But feel free before we move on to the next section to ask any questions or clarifications. This is really, well, it's sort of a webinar, but it's really more of a conference call with some guidance. So I don't want to inhibit any kind of questions. And if we feel like we need to cover another section, we can always come back to it. So, and I think Suki just joined us.
Yes, I did just come on, and I'm on phone rather than video.
Okay, great. And do you have the PowerPoint pulled up?
Yes, I do have the PowerPoint.
Okay, great. So we're about to move on to slide 4. Okay, so kind of reviewing what's been done already. In 2014, Americans consumed about 103 billion single-use plastic shopping bags, and sort of at a national level, as of 2017, 271 local governments in the USA had plastic bag ordinances. Out of those 271, about 95% of the ordinances are just a straight ban on single-use plastic bags. And about half of the ordinances are really what we'll talk about later, which are called hybrid policies, which they have a straight ban on plastic bags, but then have a fee on paper or reusable bags. And by reusable bags, we're not talking about bags that people bring from home, but what some retailers have done is they, you have in your ordinance, you have you say that a single-use paper plastic bag is something that's 2.25 mils or less, and so they'll make their reusable bag be 4 mils, or just a thicker plastic is what they consider reusable. So in Maine, about 11 communities have some type of ordinance, and 6 of those are ecomaine member communities. And if you're kind of wondering, which I always do, is what's happening on a state level? Why isn't the state intervening more? A statewide bill was actually introduced that prohibited retailers from bagging products in single-use plastic bags, but that actually failed in the last legislative session. So I think, as we can see, these kind of ordinances seem to be more successful at a local level rather than at a state level right now. Portland was was the first, I believe, city in Maine to enact an ordinance. So I'll have Matthew kind of talk about that, since he played a pretty key role in the Portland ordinance.
Hi everybody, my name is Matthew Faulkner, and I was involved from the get-go in the Portland Green Packaging Task Force. In the fall of 2012, I was a member of an environmental group that was interested in reducing the amount of plastic in the water, basically. And so I was invited to approach the city of Portland at a regularly scheduled meeting, and during the open time for citizens to speak about anything they'd like, I pitched the idea of a ban or fee on plastic bags. And interestingly, when I was done with my 3 minutes, a couple people came behind me and said, I didn't come here to speak about this, and I didn't know it was going to be on the agenda, but I used to live in Washington, D.C. or some other place, and it worked really well there, and I think it's a good idea, and I think the city council should consider this. So a few months after that, I got a call from Ed Suslovic, who was a city councilor, and he said the mayor would like to have a group called the Green Packaging Working Task Force Group or something, look into reducing plastic bags and polystyrene. And would you like to be on this task force? So starting in early, I think January of 2013, we had our first meeting. And it really was, the city of Portland, to their credit, did start with a clean sheet of paper and without any too many preconceived ideas. And they assembled a group that was pretty balanced, including 2 citizens and a lot of lobbyists. There were 3 representing Dunkin' Donuts, the Maine Restaurant Association, Retail Association of Maine. Maine Grocers Association and the American Chemistry Council. And then also there were a representative from Maine Audubon, myself from Surf Rider, and Kathy Ramsdell from Friends of Casco Bay, and Environment Maine. So they started out with a really pretty even-handed group. Of course, you know, the lobbyists were there to try to stop anything from happening, and people from the environmental groups were there to try to do something. So it took about a year, and it took a little over a year, actually, of meeting every month for about an hour and a half. And finally, we came up with, after a lot of research and study, they came up with the idea of the 5-cent fee and an outright ban on polystyrene, basically food takeout containers. Initially, they tried to ban all polystyrene, but there were some people that really needed it. For instance, the people that sell lobsters or fish and ship it overnight on FedEx can only ship in a polystyrene container. That's one of Federal Express's rules for their shipping. So though there's a lot of exceptions in there, and they are all for good reason. Let's see. And so what we did was ultimately we looked at case studies from similar sized towns and cities in the United States. Specifically, they were all a little bit larger than Portland, but specifically Bellingham, Washington, Aspen, Boulder, and one other one. And we basically modeled what the city of Portland came up with on those cities, and we contacted people in each of those cities and took their advice and tried to learn from their mistakes, basically, along the way. And I think it was April of 2015 that was implemented in the city of Portland. And just for follow-up, about a year later, I contacted Troy Moon, who's the sustainability coordinator for the city of Portland, and he's also on the ecomaine board. And he said it's basically been self-enforcing. They've had only one, it was actually a coffee shop that needed a phone call to remind them of the new ordinance. And that was about it. And other than that, there have been no real problems. So they're pretty happy with the way it went. And so if you have any questions about the process, I'd be happy to try and answer them.
Matthew, did you find it difficult to adopt 2 ordinances at the same time, or did you find that to be a good strategy?
The polystyrene thing is really a no-brainer. There was virtually no resistance to that, except Dunkin' Donuts did not want to give up their polystyrene cups, and the fish guys were concerned that they would be banned from using their polystyrene containers to ship fish. And other than that, there was like no resistance at all. Bags were only a little bit different. There was not too much. Well, the American Chemistry Council fought it for a while, and then they kind of gave up. And Shelley Doak from the Maine Grocers Association, their lobbyist, worked very hard to stop it. But other than that, there was very little. I would say the polystyrene thing, and then also in Cape Elizabeth, it was like a slam dunk. There was no resistance. And in Cape Elizabeth, we had one concerned citizen that wrote us a few letters, didn't really understand why we would do this or what process we used and to come to the conclusions that we did, et cetera. But other than that, it happened very quickly and it was very straightforward.
Great.
And I have a question. So Dunkin' Donuts, I guess, ultimately came around and they're not using polystyrene cups anymore?
They didn't come around. The ordinance passed and they had to comply. They don't like it. And I'll tell you another, once Portland did it, South Portland passed, they took basically the same ordinances and they went into effect in South Portland shortly thereafter. And our town, Cape Elizabeth, is contiguous with South Portland. So one of the things I had to do when I was asked by our leaders to go to, Cape's a pretty small town, so I was asked to go visit all the people that would be affected by this. And it didn't take too long, there weren't that many. But interestingly, when I went to Cumberland Farms and I talked to a supervisor there and asked her if it would be a problem for them, she said, once Portland and South Portland did it, we figured we were next. We have all the paper cups, everything we need is in the warehouse. It's all loaded in the computers. All we got to do is turn the key and go the next day. So
and it's Cape Elizabeth. Is that ordinance a duplicate of the South Portland and Portland ordinances?
Very similar, and we did that for a reason, basically for the sake of continuity, because it was so similar to Portland and South Portland, and it simplified the whole process. I think it's a good ordinance the way it is, and it made it easy to implement. Yeah.
This is Lissa Bitterman. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. So I didn't introduce myself before. I'm at home and just traveled 3,000 miles yesterday and looked like I got beaten with the travel stick. So I'm not on video, but I'm the business development manager at ecomaine. And my question is that one of the things that we struggle with a lot at ecomaine is sort of a disconnect between manufacturing across the country of all kinds of different things and actually the recycling industry and what materials are actually recyclable in our facility versus things that in theory could be recyclable. And the thing that we noticed after the Portland ordinance came about was the cup that Dunkin' Donuts switched to from their polystyrene coffee containers to an actual number 5 plastic, is that to the regular person, they would not even necessarily be able to discern any difference between what the cups actually look like. From an industry perspective, the cup on the bottom says it's a number 5 plastic, but I'm not actually even sure that if a whole plethora of those made it into our recycling stream, if we would be able to bail it with the 3 through 7 plastics, because typically those are meant to be like clear plastics or colored tubs or whatever. But the reality is that I think that people either still think that it's unrecyclable as polystyrene was, or don't even necessarily recognize the difference in the materials because it looks so similar. So I guess kind of my bigger question is, you know, as communities move forward with continued ordinances and straight out bans, does it seem like it would be possible to even more stringently dictate what could be a replacement for polystyrene or for the single-use plastic bags? Because the American Chemistry Council, these lobbyists, etc., they're just looking to continue making and selling products. So they're only going to make as much change as they actually officially have to make. And I'm not sure that it necessarily adjusts the mentality of the public around the recyclability of these particular containers versus we just in the industry know that, you know, polystyrene isn't being sold in our communities anymore and isn't breaking up and being little pellets in the waterways, etc. So it's kind of a big question, but I just wanted to bring that to light because I think it's on some levels a missing link.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate that a lot, Lisa, because I feel that the disconnect is also, you know, felt on our end too, where we want to know what the life cycle, what the energy impact is on creating the material and the cost to recycle it. Now, there's a lot of data on there versus paper bag versus plastic bag, but it's really interesting. I mean, could you recycle a paper cup that was used for hot liquids?
Yes.
Hi, folks. This is Kara. I just want to comment. I'm involved in a project. I study ocean plastics for a living, and I'm involved in a project supported by the NOAA Marine Debris Program around behavior change and consumer habits. And I think ultimately that's really the way we have to be moving, is to say, when you go to Dunkin' Donuts, you should bring your own mug, as opposed to expecting them to give you something that will either go into the trash or the recycling bin where it may or may not be recycled. So I think that's, in my mind, that's the long-term goal, is a reuse mentality, but that is definitely behavior change on the side of the consumer, and not something that can really easily be put forth in an ordinance or something like that. That's where the education piece becomes really important.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
That makes a lot of sense.
So let's, if you have any other questions, we could, they may be answered in the next couple sections. So we'll just kind of move on and we can sort of revisit this. The end of this kind of talks more about community engagement and those different sort of angles we can take to reach the consumer, the average resident, about not just, okay, so now you don't, you're not getting a plastic bag, but the importance of bringing a reusable bag, or pardon me, a reusable mug to the store. So, and this sort of goes into what's your policy goal. So, one of the, pardon me, I've got a little cough, so excuse me. It's important to set a policy goal, not really only for your work group or task force to have a focus, but really for your community at large. If you're just saying, we're going to ban plastic bags, the public and the retailer wants to know why. Like, what's the reason? So if you have a policy goal and focus, it sounds like Portland's policy goal could have been, reducing plastic in the waterways. So, is your goal litter reduction, helping the environment, reducing marine impacts, improving waste management, or just, complying with the standard or law maybe set at like a state level? I think that really helps attain buy-in from the stakeholders and really helps focus education and outreach efforts. So folks in Waterville and in Rockland, maybe if you don't have necessarily a straightforward or a very focused policy goal, it might be helpful as you're going through this process to set one. So we'll just quickly run through the different types of ordinances and some of their benefits and challenges. So there's just the straight banning of plastic bags. So that would just be the banning of the distribution of thin plastic bags by retailers. And the benefits of that is that it eliminates thin single-use plastic bags at the point of sale. But some of the challenges are that, as I mentioned before, and kind of, Lissa, what you had brought up about the polystyrene, is that retailers could opt for a thicker type of plastic than what the ordinance states. So finding these different loopholes. So the standard mill, which is actually moving up in more ordinances, and I think some folks here, their ordinances state the mill has to be or cannot be less than 4. But in some of them, it's 2.25. And then a paper, and as I said before, another challenge is that paper or reusable, quote unquote, reusable bags, plastic bags are still available free of charge. So, and that's just a straight ban. So again, you're eliminating then-use single plastic bags, but there's still sort of a loophole for alternative, and it doesn't really incentivize behavior change if those other alternatives are still free. Saco is one of the communities that just has a straight ban. They don't have a fee on paper or reusable plastic bags. Another type of ordinance is a fee. So that's just charging the consumer a fee for each individual single-use bag needed at the point of sale. Some of the benefits of that is that incentivizes consumers to bring their own bags to avoid a fee. And then it also maintains consumer choice, which I think we all know as ourselves and as, working in just any kind of environmental advocacy, people like to have choices. But some of the challenges are that it doesn't really eliminate the distribution of single bags, and if the fee isn't set high enough, it may not discourage the use of a single plastic bag. So I don't believe Portland or South Portland has specific data on this, but looking at national data, if the fee is set too low, then at first there's sort of this, avoidance of plastic bags, but over time people say, oh, what's 5 cents, what's 10 cents? There's one city, although 10 cents is the mode that most people, is the mode fee that the most US cities use, but there are some places that charge 25 cents a bag. The other challenge is that it could increase the use of paper, and again, that's just having a fee. Kathy, I know Cape Elizabeth just instituted a fee, is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
In Cape Elizabeth, there's a fee, and I would, at this point, I would just say, if you're considering, whatever you're considering, it's really important to include paper. If you just try to ban plastic bags, it's just going to increase the use of paper bags, and paper bags are no bargain at all. And you can make the case that paper bags are worse for the environment than plastic bags. There's a lot of reasons to, so if you're gonna try to ban them both. If you want a fee, make sure the fee covers everything.
Mm-hmm.
And remember, the point is to get the consumer to bring a bag, not to spend the nickel to get a bag or to switch from plastic to paper. That's important. Don't try to put everything on paper.
Great. And then another type of ordinance, which is becoming more common, is it's called a hybrid ordinance, which is adopting a ban on the then single-use plastic bags and then charging a carryout fee on paper and I like to use quote unquote reusable bags, which are really the thicker mill plastic bags. Benefits of that really is that incentivizes consumers to bring their own bags to avoid a fee, which is something, I'll echo that Matthew just said. And then in a way, it also maintains consumer choice because it's not just plastic bags aren't completely eliminated. A carryout bag isn't completely eliminated from, point of sale. And then it eliminates the single-use plastic bags at the point of sale, and it just overall reduces the consumption of single-use carryout bags. But one of really the only challenge to this, and if anyone has any other comment on the challenges, is that opponents may bring up equity. So you're banning plastic bags, but then folks need to pay a fee for another type of bag, and what if they don't have a reusable bag? But this has been remedied by doing a giveaway, partnering with the larger retailers that are affected by the ordinance for a giveaway of reusable bags, and consumers can still reuse a single-use bag. So they buy it for 5 cents and then they can hold on to it to the next time they come to the store, and that's still following that waste hierarchy. So Freeport, Suki, I don't know if you want to jump in on this. Freeport actually has a policy.
Yep, be happy to. Freeport's much smaller than Portland, that's for sure. And actually, we banned the styrofoam from all of Freeport marketing in the 1990s. It was an elementary school group that did the research and brought it to the town council. And I can't emphasize enough the importance of getting young people involved in anything that you want to do, because it was those students, boy, they got it moved right through with lots of parents and other people jumping on board. But the town council is very, very responsive to young people. That was in the 1990s. And then in 2013, there were 2 high school seniors who did for their senior project a lot of research on single-use plastic bag banning. And they brought that to the town council. The town council at the time was interested, and they sent it off to the solid waste recycling committee, which did a very long research on it and recommended absolutely to ban the single-use plastic bags. However, the town council would not do that. We had 30, 40, 50 people filling the town council every single time it came up in order to testify. The big problem against it was that a lot of people like their plastic bags for kitty litter. I hate to say it. They clean up their kitty litter with plastic bags, and that's why they didn't think it was fair to ban it. And one of the town councilors was very, very worried that everybody would stop shopping in Freeport because they couldn't get their single-use plastic bags, and they would go to Brunswick or Yarmouth, which is actually has not happened at all since we did it. So for a year, we visited with the town council and the ordinance committee, and ultimately the ordinance committee recommended that they didn't want to vote on it. They just refused to vote on it. It was too hot a political issue with all these children and adults coming in saying, please ban it. So they met with Ed Suslovic from Portland and decided to go with the 5-cent be both paper and plastic. And that was their recommendation, the town council. That's what the town council decided to do. But we said no. When I say we, that's the Freeport Climate Action Team and other bag banning folks in town. We came back and said, no, we want plastic bags banned. And if you want the 5 cents on the paper, that's okay. But we want the plastic bags banned. And so we decided to do a referendum ourselves. We early in 2016, doing a lot of 2015, doing a lot of the education of folks around and getting the signatures, getting them approved, and getting it on the June ballot. And when I say June ballot, it's because in Freeport, you have to vote to approve the school budget in June. And we didn't want to hold a special expensive election. So we got onto the June ballot, and 60% of the people voted yes to the ban, 40% voted no. Bow Street Market had already the previous April had said they were going to ban the plastic bags themselves, and made a big deal out of it. Gave 500 reusable bags away, and they take all money that comes in on the 5-cent paper bag and they donate it to the town community services. Shaw's said, we'll do whatever you want to do, whatever you say. Rite Aid said, whatever you say, we'll go along with it. And basically, that's been what's happened since then. The single-use plastic bag is banned, and we've had no problems with it coming back up. People can buy a 10-cent, as you say, a thicker plastic bag that can be reused a number of times, and you can put your kitty litter in it. People use it for garbage pails. And then the paper bag is 5 cents. I rarely see people at Shaw's asking for paper. They almost always spend the extra 10 cents for the thick plastic bag. What we were most interested in was seeing behavior change, and we've certainly seen some behavior change, total behavior change at Bow Street Market, about 50% behavior change at Shaw's. It needs a lot more signage and a lot more energy to get folks who go to Shaw's to remember to bring in their reusables.
Thanks, Susie. That was a great
Sure.
one.
I have a question.
Sure.
In the towns that have either banned or imposed a fee on plastic bags, is this only for grocery stores and food service establishments, or could someone still get a plastic bag, say, at Home Depot or Staples?
Good question. Good question. In Freeport, it applies to any store that has 2% or more of food. So it is not banning all of plastic bags from all of Freeport. But the Freeport merchants have switched to paper. It's rare that you can find a plastic bag when you go shopping in Freeport.
This came up also in Cape Elizabeth. The ordinance as originally drafted or proposed was the same as Freeport and Portland, that it was for food establishments where sales are 2% or more were food. And one of the town councilors asked why it didn't apply to all retail outlets. So we went out and did more outreach and talked to all the retail vendors and asked them what they were currently using and if they would support this. And by retail, we're talking even medical offices who might give you a toothbrush when you leave. And for the most part, people either weren't using bags and so therefore didn't really care or were supportive just in general. But the folks who had gift shops were very concerned that that they would turn away customers who might be visitors to town. Especially there's a gift shop at Fort Williams where busloads of tourists come off of cruise ships. and are not going to be aware of local ordinances and probably aren't going to be coming with reusable bags. So we did consider applying both the bans to all retail establishments, but in the end, the town council scaled it back to food service establishments only.
In Freeport, very similarly, and because we've got so many visitors coming from all over the place, but we stuck to the very thin plastic single-use bags. That's what is banned. And because a lot of people, when they go to a clothing store and they buy 2 shirts and 3 pairs of trousers, they want something that's strong enough to carry and it won't break. And those larger bags often get reused and reused and reused. So that we didn't try to ban them.
So this kind of brings us into our next couple sections, which talks about more of the the nitty-gritty of drafting your ordinance. Folks in Rockland, have you guys started drafting an ordinance yet, or are you just still at the beginning stages?
Well, what we've done thus far is basically, with the exception of maybe the most recent couple of towns, is downloaded all of the ordinances that have been passed in Maine and have compiled them into a packet and kind of reviewed all the differences to a certain extent for a comparison, a data comparison. We currently, one of our paths of thought for this is to use the Belfast ordinance as a baseline, because they're the closest town that has adopted one. And, ideally we'd like to see this be adopted across all the neighboring coastal communities near us. And we felt that might be an easier path forward, just like they did in Portland, South Portland, and Cape Elizabeth. So while we haven't written one or started writing one, we kind of are anticipating using all the other ones as sort of a cheat sheet to copy and paste from to make our lives a little bit more straightforward and provide some continuity.
Great. And Stu in Waterville, have you already drafted an ordinance?
We haven't drafted it yet, but we're in the process of drafting it. First, I thought it was going to be very simple. We would just simply copy the Portland ordinance. But then we started thinking about it, and we decided first we were going to go with a fee, a 5-cent fee on plastic bags. But we felt the community would perceive that as another tax, and they don't want taxes. So we thought an outright ban would have a greater chance of success. So that's what we're going for.
All right.
Can I just make a comment on that? We were kind of aware of that as well with the fee, and so we did stress to the town council and the ordinance committee that the fee that is charged goes directly to the retailer for any lawful purpose. So the retailer is keeping that money. It's not going to the government like a tax would.
I understand, but we had another problem. A few years ago, we adopted pay-as-you-throw trash collection and curbside single-stream recycling. And I'll tell you, it was a real battle. We won, but it was such a battle that it frightened a lot of people. And we're not willing to go through this fight again. So we want to make it as easy as possible for the city of Waterville to simply adopt a ban on single-use plastic bags. Paper bags, I know there are big problems with them, but we're going to leave those alone for now.
Okay.
I have a legal question. When we did our research for Falmouth, originally we wanted to do a fee for a year and then a ban after the second year. But I found a regulation, and I sent a question to Senator Kathy Breen, and she got legal confirmation that there was a law that passed, a state law in 1991, that says retailers may only provide customers with plastic bags if there's a receptacle to collect the used bags, right, the entrance. So my concern was, if we ban them, our retailers were no longer required to collect these and recycle them. Does anybody know if that's still a law, or if that has actually had any effect on your retailers where you have bans?
Kathy, that's a great question, and it is still an active law, but I'm not sure if it's affected any bans or fees. I don't know if anyone else has any input on that.
I can tell you that when Hannaford came to speak to the city of Portland when we were considering this, they said that the plastic bags that they collect are actually a revenue stream for them. I wouldn't be worried about that going away.
Yeah, I know it's a revenue, and I've enjoyed a lot of conversation with Trex. I think it's really cool that gets to be mixed with waste wood chips, and it is a commodity, $40 a ton or something. But I know that it takes a lot of space. It takes a lot of effort to keep them clean and dry, and I believe that we've changed behavior in Falmouth, and that's, I think, our number one goal. At least, I think everybody has their own goals about what a bag ordinance would do. But I think we have to accept that, we do have plastic in our world. There are so many other sources of plastic, and we need to focus on what can be recycled. And I also put a twist on it. What can we recycle in this country? So far, I don't think Falmouth is pursuing a ban. I know we were asked to consider it, but I think we've changed behavior, and I think still people are reusing these thin film bags, and hopefully we're still making the right kind of difference.
Yeah, Kathy, you bring up a really interesting unintended consequence of a ban that I didn't think of until you brought that up, because I was aware of the law, but I'm definitely going to look into there aren't many just straight bans without other kind of fees in Maine, but if any of those have seen the towns in Maine who have implemented just a straight ban, like in Saco, for example, has the Hannafords there stop carrying the collection point for the single-use plastic bags, because you still can get them somewhere, and they can take produce bags there and Ziploc bags and all of that. So I'm going to look into that, and I'll message the group about if that's had any negative effect on that piece, because I think it is still important to have that collection point regardless of whether the retailer actually carries a plastic bag or distributes them or not.
Thanks.
I find it interesting that Hannaford sees plastic bags as a revenue stream. I thought they would have to pay to recycle plastic bags recycled.
Actually, they're pretty valuable. It's kind of interesting because they won't tell us where they go.
Yeah, I was going to ask that.
There's some concern that they go to some places where they're burned to make electricity. Some places that don't, that for instance they don't have the scrubbers, and the way they burn stuff is not as, say, technologically advanced as the way ecomaine does, let's say.
I found out from chasing all the trails from where our 3 stores, Walmart, Hannaford, and Shaw's, that it's all picked up by Casella. I think they have a lot of contracts across Maine, and it goes down to Trex.
Mm-hmm.
We also had confirmed that point with Hannaford at one point, and that was the response that we got from them in particular, was around their supply goes to Trex, is what they had guaranteed.
So just to review some of the terminology really quick, in part of drafting the ordinance, it seems like folks in Rockland and Waterville have a pretty good sense of who's going to be involved in drafting the ordinance and kind of have a good start. So that's great. And I liked what Matthew had said, is that in the Portland ordinance, there's multiple stakeholders involved, not just, people who are advocating for this, but even people in the opposition, because I think that helps with getting a new perspective, but also finding some common ground. And that's really great. Some of the just definitions that differ from, I noticed looking at all the ordinances, there's reusable bag, there's single-use plastic bag, there's retailer versus store. So I think kind of just digging through, and it sounds like you folks already have, is digging through those and seeing, what definitions are going to work for your ordinance. And And then back to the fees and the taxes. One of the things that I didn't know is that, and I've never noticed, I guess, looking on my receipts, but the fees actually have to be on a different line after the end of this, after the final total, they have to just show as a segregated fee versus, because it's not a tax, but it just has to be a segregated part of the receipt. So that was kind of interesting. And then, as Kathy had mentioned, and Kara too, I think that stores can use the money collected for any lawful purpose because it's not a tax. So it might be interesting to find out what different retailers in your community might do with that money and sort of use that in the in your education and outreach. Like this X number of plastic bags that aren't, well, maybe not using that in education and outreach so much, but yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
I had a question that relates to that. Did you get any pushback on is it easy for the retailers to change their receipts to do that? And also, several of the ordinances that have fees typically also have record keeping obligations, and was there any pushback around that?
I can comment on that for Cape Elizabeth if you like. That was actually, with our drafting, we started with Portland and South Portland's ordinances, much in the way those of you considering ordinances are moving forward. And the part about itemizing on a receipt and the record keeping were ultimately removed. And the receipt part was removed largely because of farm stands who often are scribbling down totals on a piece of paper and they don't really have a register system and an inventory system. And so we just completely removed that from the ordinance.
One of the other parts of the ordinance usually is non-compliance and what enforcement tactics are going to be taken. Is it going to be different tiers? So some, the first confrontation is a warning, and then there's different level of fees for how many times you have to, go back to the retailer. And then there's this other, a lot of the ordinances have time between what the effective date is and the compliance date. So giving a retailer not only enough advance notice in that this is going to go into effect, but when it does, and then the time between its effective date and when it's actually going to be enforced is also crucial in the ordinance. And then record keeping and inspection. Aside from the visible fee, so I guess we can kind of talk about this in the next slide. In Falmouth, I talked to Kimberly Darling and Kathy. You can probably speak a little bit more to this as well if you'd like, but she was saying that what they did prior to the ordinance going into effect was talk to Hannaford's, and their rough number for how many plastic bags were being distributed in Falmouth alone was 2 million plastic bags a year. And so they were able to use that as a baseline to then measure how many plastic bags have been reduced over the last, what's going to be a full 2 years. So in April 2018, she'll have a completely compiled data set from Hannaford's and Shaw's and one other grocery store, I can't quite remember, but the bigger retailers that are just Maine, Maine folks who are getting distributing plastic bags. And she said as of now, since the ordinance went into effect, about 20% of plastic bags has been reduced. Now that's a rough number, but she'll have more accurate data next spring. But there is something to be said if you can, if it's politically feasible to keeping record and being able to measure that success, because it goes with, I think for me, and talking to other folks in really with Kimberly and just with other types of ordinances, it really builds rapport with your residents and retailers for making these sort of changes to show that, this is the success we've seen, and not just what's been reduced, but what's that, how's it help the environment? And that's kind of where your policy goal sort of comes back into play, is like, have we met our policy goal, or, some of the different objectives within that goal. So just kind of keeping that in mind of going that direction of making retailers keep record of what their, at least the bigger retailers keep record of the plastic bag reduction. And then also in the ordinance, another sort of recommendation is to make the retailers in the ordinance make them report out at the request of the municipality. So that was another recommendation by one of the professors at University of Southern Maine. He's done a lot of research. Dr. Travis Wagner has done a lot of research on single-use bag ordinances in Maine specifically, but also throughout the United States. And that was sort of one of the biggest pieces of the ordinance he saw were either missing or included for successful ordinances.
Chelsea, we were trying to make it as business friendly as possible when we started our original research for drafting an ordinance, and we quickly saw that it was more important to go for more of the bang for our efforts, get a bigger bang for our buck. So go where the largest generators were of bags, and in Falmouth it's a little easier. We went through with the square footage. That was our applicability. So any building, retail store that has greater than, 10,000 square feet. So that ended up being like the big six, our Walmart, Shaw's, Hannaford, and Rite Aid, Staples, and even Goodwill, ironically enough. So that was who we figured had a big enough system and it wouldn't be such a tedious, difficult thing to do the record keeping.
Great. Does anyone have any questions on this piece?
I don't have any questions, just to mention, sorry, this is Suki, Freeport. We just made sure that we had enough lead time with the retailers so that they could use up any of the plastic bags as single-use bags that they already had with their names on it, so that they didn't, they weren't sitting on a whole pile of them. That's one reason why we gave them about 4 months before it went into effect. Yeah. And I'm going to need to jump off of the webinar at this point.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
For joining us. Your input was really valuable.
Okay, bye-bye.
Chelsea, before we move on to the next step, I just want to make a comment about the process a little bit, if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
So as I mentioned, we in Cape Elizabeth, we drafted ordinances based on Portland and South Portland. And then I looked at existing town ordinances and made sort of structural formatting tweaks so that they would match the format of existing town ordinances. And that's what we submitted to our town council. And then I think this is my first time going through any kind of public process like this. So that's why I thought I'd share this. But what happened next was the town council sent that to our ordinance committee. And it turns out that Maureen O'Mara, who's our, Matthew, what's her title? She's the town planner?
Town planner.
So anyway, she's the one who does the real drafting. And pretty quickly, she suggested that these not become new town ordinances, but that they become amendments to existing ordinances under, I think it's a solid waste ordinance, and I think maybe it's all solid waste. I'd have to look at the structure. But point being, there was a lot of work that she did. Even after the preliminary work that we had done to match what existing ordinance language, she took the next step and found the right place in the few existing ordinances in the town where to put these and how to rearrange definitions and stuff like that. So there was some process involved in the town itself. And I think the bulk of the massaging happened within the ordinance committee meetings. There was a series of maybe 4 or 5 meetings within the ordinance committee, and then they're the ones who sent it back to town council for the public hearing, et cetera. So that was just a little bit that you should plan on. I mean, that took some time. In fact, we submitted the ordinances to town council in, I think, November or December of last year, and it didn't even go to the ordinance committee until like July, because they had to deal with this whole marijuana situation following the last year's election. So we had a 6-month hiatus before anything even moved on this, and then it took another 5 months to get it even to a vote on town council.
That's great insight for the just planning. So any other comments from the speakers about just the whole drafting ordinance plan or or just planning in general, from, you know, writing the draft to education and outreach?
I have a question or a comment. One problem I have is that the term single-use plastic bags is really not a good term. Most of my friends, probably most people, use single-use plastic bags multiple times. Certainly, we already mentioned kitty litter. And it confuses people if we say single-use, because they can be used many times. And are there really any alternatives to the single-use bag, some sort of small recyclable bag that you can buy for not too much money?
I know for a fact that for kitty litter, you can buy boxes of bags that don't cost much at all. We used to do that in our home, and for dogs as well. Yeah.
This is Lissa here. I think that, you know, Stu, I get your point, and certainly for lay people, the terminology can be confusing. Yeah. But I mean, technically, single-use plastic bags are recyclable if people manage to get them into the receptacles at the Hannafords and the Walmarts, etc. So, picking language that is understandable to the layperson is key, and that's where maybe the I don't know, the distinction between the thin plastic bags and the thick plastic bags, if you're going to go for like a certain mill thickness, might help with the terminology. I know for myself, I have 2 indoor cats, and what I use is something called a litter genie, and it actually is like a kind of like a diaper genie, where it has this incredibly long tube of biodegradable plastic film in it that you tie at one end, and then you press a lever and you put the kitty litter in it and you fill it up, and then you cut it off and then retie again. And the biodegradable aspect of it isn't terribly important, seeing as it goes to waste to energy, but maybe getting people in the mindset of not using a plastic bag every single time they scoop litter, but to have some type of a bucket that has a cover on it or something like that, and just use one plastic bag, and once it's full, then take it out to the outdoor trash. But I think that these single-use bags are recyclable when you get right down to it. So I think it's that's where the education piece comes in as well.
And I think in the ordinance, for the language piece of it, you could replace single-use plastic bag with thin film plastic bag, and then your definition could include what that mill thickness is for a thin film plastic bag. So you could pose it that way too. It doesn't have to be single-use. It doesn't have to say single-use plastic bag.
Also, usually these ordinances are for bags with handles. Mm-hmm. They don't affect the bag on a roll that you might find near where you get your fruits and vegetables at a grocery store. So those would also be technically single-use bags, but the difference being the bags with a handle are the ones that we're targeting with the fee. And also, as far as cat litter and dog picking up after your dog, there's all kinds of plastic bags that you'll find, like bread bags and whatnot, without even needing to use any single use or bag with handles for that purpose. We don't have any single use plastic bags with handles that we get at the grocery store, and we have a cat and take care of all of her needs from the litter box with other plastic bags that come through the household from the deli or what have you, bread bags, et cetera, et cetera. Also, if you want to get right down to it, if you are walking your dog, instead of picking up after the dog, you could bring a small trowel and bury what your dog leaves behind if you walk in the woods or whatever. But there's a lot of alternatives to single-use bags or bags with handles, like carry-out bags for picking up after your animals.
I hope you're not suggesting that being done in the city limits, Matthew.
Oh, well, I live in the countryside, and people, I mean, most people walk their dogs in the woods here, so.
So we're at 3 o'clock, so I kind of want to get to the community engagement piece, because while drafting the ordinance is obviously a key piece, really the success really comes to what we've talked about, the consumer making a behavior change, understanding why they're making a behavior change, and there's a lot of different ways to do that. So there's partnering with community organizations and retailers for usable bag giveaways. I think Hannaford's in the Portland ordinance, when that passed, they did a bag giveaway for a period of time. Like we mentioned, advance notice of adopting the ordinance, not just to retailers, but to residents, and again, bringing back that policy goal, like why are we, you know, for whatever reason, banning or putting a fee on plastic bag, on paper, and, you know, why do we want people to bring their reusable bag to the store, bring their reusable mug, you know, all of that. And then, so you can supply signage for the retailers, develop a marketing campaign. These are just some examples of different cities. Well, one is Hannaford's up here. And then these are different things that different communities have done. This community, I think it's, I'll just play this quick, did a really cool marketing campaign for theirs. Yeah, Tacoma. So I'll play that really quick.
Be prepared for the Bring Your Own Bag ordinance going into effect on July 12, 2017. This prevents the use of disposable plastic checkout bags at Tacoma retail stores. These bags will no longer be distributed, and shoppers are encouraged to bring reusable bags to avoid paying a minimum fee of 5 cents for recycled paper or other reusable bags given at the checkout stand. Get helpful tips. Learn about exceptions and more at cityoftacoma.org/shoppingbags.
I'm sorry, I don't know. Could you guys hear that?
Yeah.
Okay.
We're about to let the first group of 50 in. We're going to enter through this door down here, one at a time, single file.
Sorry, I have no idea what's happening.
The next thing in the YouTube stream.
Ooh, okay. So from folks who have, you know, implemented or begun implementing their ordinance, what are some strategies for success that you've used to engage retailers and residents?
One thing I'd like to stress is really reaching out to these folks before you even put an ordinance forward. So I think talking to all the stakeholders and understanding what they're currently doing and what the impact would be on their business, and letting them know that this is even in discussion is hugely helpful. I mean, it certainly was helpful for us in Cape Elizabeth to know that Cumberland Farms was ready to hit go the day the thing passed, and the IGA, which is our only grocery store in kind of a small market, was fully supportive. You know, so knowing who the players are and how they're going to be impacted and what their initial thoughts on it are is hugely valuable. We're just now sort of in the planning of how to go out and talk to the community more, you know, more publicly or more broadly phase. But I think that legwork ahead of time was critical.
Great. Kathy, did you have any input? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, Kara, that was the first thing that we did too, because we figured they would be the ones most impacted, because the customers have a choice, like you said early on. And the other thing that we did was did a lot of research across the country. What are some of the unintended consequences? And that there were some stores that were providing a super thick bag and calling it a reusable, but as a lot of studies show that they were not getting reused, and they were not environmentally sensible either, taking more energy and being much thicker. And so we actually went to the various grocery stores and said, hey, have you heard about this? What are your plans? And so Hannaford says, no, we're never going to do that. Shaw says, yes, we have something, because we knew they were using that in Portland. And we had just an open discussion. The other thing that you might find it difficult is if you have any large businesses that have like corporate headquarters elsewhere. Some of these businesses wouldn't speak freely between us doing the research, because they said they didn't have any authority to do so. So be prepared, give yourself a lot of extra time and be more formal so you can present them like a list of questions so they can get it to their corporate sustainability person and give you the straight answer from the beginning.
It's a great point. Folks from Rockland or Stu, did you have any questions or thoughts about about anything we've talked about or community engagement specifically?
Well, yes. I mean, I would like to convince merchants that they would stand to benefit with a ban on plastic bags, because people would still be able to get free paper bags in Waterville, and they cost a lot of money to produce and for the stores to buy. And I would think that a retailer would prefer not to give away paper bags, but to encourage people to use reusable bags, because then they wouldn't have to buy paper bags. And besides, paper bags are pretty lousy for carrying groceries. Bags with handles, particularly reusable bags, are much better. So I don't see why the retailers would resist this ban.
I think the retailers are at a bit of the mercy of the consumer, and that's why it's probably important to consider putting a fee on paper bags, because if the consumer can get a free bag, no matter what it's made of, they're probably going to want a free bag. So I actually would worry that it will be a ding to the retailers in having to buy and supply free paper bags.
Which are about 5 times more expensive than the thin film plastic, at least.
I understand that. We're not going to impose a fee on paper bags. We thought the retailers would give them away for free until they realized how much it was costing them, and then they can impose their own fee if they chose.
Matthew, do you want to mention what you guys learned about retailers self-imposing fees?
Yeah, long before the city of Portland took this up, the Natural Resources Council of Maine was trying to do something, and I was involved with a group there. And it was essentially all the same lobbyists that were invited to come to Portland. And the Natural Resources Council of Maine tried to get a voluntary thing going with, and they called it, "Do you have your bag?" or something like that. And the person from Hannaford came to speak briefly. And he said, essentially, we'll do whatever the town tells us to do, but we're not going to volunteer to do anything because we have to give up a competitive advantage to do that. And if we say we're going to take the high road and stop handing out plastic bags, then 30 minutes after that happens, Shaw is going to have commercials on the TV and radio that say, hey, we have all the bags you want at Shaw's. So they said, you're going to need to make an even playing field for everyone, and then we will happily comply with whatever ordinance you choose to come up with. And one other thing that's sort of related to that is, I would say to maybe try to think about this in just a slightly different way, and that it not so much a fee for a bag, but that you're actually buying that bag. We all know there's no free lunch, and that those bags are not free, and that the cost of those bags is tied up in whatever else that retailer sells. So whether you want a bag or not, or whether you need a bag or not, we're all helping to pay for them. And retailers, that's what they do. They sell stuff. It's just as easy for them to charge a nickel for a bag as it is anything else in that store. And really, why should you leave a retail establishment with anything that you didn't pay for? So the idea is that you're really just taking responsibility for yourself when, if you want a plastic bag, you purchase it for 5 cents before you leave. Not that it shouldn't, you don't need to couch it as this onerous new law, but just a simple matter of fairness in a way, if that makes sense. You see where I'm going with that.
This is Lissa here, and to that point, a couple of years ago, I was a very regular customer at the Wild Bird store out by the mall, buying birdseed and whatnot. And the owner is very environmentally conscious, and we had a lot of chats, and she knew that I worked at ecomaine. And at one point she said something to me about, you know, I hate these plastic bags and I just don't know what to do about it. And I said, well, why don't you just go bagless and just take a stand? And she was like, you know, I'm going to do that. And she finished using the stock of plastic bags and paper bags that she had. She advertised to all of her customers that, you know, to take a stand with nature, and the fact that this is a store that provides food for wild animals, that she was just going to own it and live it and walk the walk. And she got rid of all bags. And now she and her staff help people carry merchandise out of the store to their car. They will let customers take merchandise in the cardboard boxes that they receive their orders in. And then also from a branding perspective, she bought a bunch of, you know, cloth reusable bags with her logo on them that people can purchase at the store. So it's, you know, A, she's making profit on those. B, people have an option if they want to leave with a bag. And C, she's, you know, promoting her business by having her bags out there walking around in the community. And so I think that, you know, an issue that shouldn't be lost on any of us, and particularly municipalities that are, you know, thinking of trying to eliminate these single-use bags, is to speak to, you know, the environmental piece of it, to speak to the various businesses about, you know, how can you become more green? How can you own this? How can you not just look at it as if something is being imposed upon you, but really embrace it and use it as a way to, you know, show your customers that you're concerned about the environment and that you're going to do your part. And in them participating and shopping at that store, they're doing their part as well.
Another thing you could try, which didn't work in Falmouth because of, I don't understand what legal, but to compensate a customer a nickel, say, every time they bring in their bag. The problem is that can be abused if you're not, you know, if you get the wrong kind of setup. So I wanted to propose that, but it didn't go over well.
Well, you know, several years ago, Hannaford was doing exactly that in Waterville. If you brought in your own shopping bag, they'd give you nickel each time.
And Whole Foods in Portland still does that. So that might be a store that you could reach out to find out exactly how they're making that work without it being abused or abused egregiously.
We have a couple questions from Rockland. One is, have there been any sort of negative experiences post passing the ordinances, or has it kind of been smooth sailing? It seems from this presentation, for the most part, once you've jumped all the hurdles to get the ordinance passed, that it's been relatively smooth sailing, with the exception of a coffee shop that needed a reminder. But does anyone have any stories that we should kind of be on the lookout to try and deal with ahead of time?
I can tell you, when Portland was going through this, one of the first meetings, we invited one of the town councilors from Freeport, and that was one of the questions he got. And he said, there has never been, I think that their enforcement involved writing a letter and then a possible fine, and the fine would increase. He said, no one's ever got a letter, no one's ever got a fine. And in Freeport, the polystyrene ban was essentially self-enforcing, and that no one challenged it. And that if people saw somebody, for instance, maybe a new restaurant in town that tried to use polystyrene takeout containers, they would be all over that place. And so it kind of was enforced without the heavy hand of the town doing it, but their own neighbors were kind of keeping an eye on each other. And I know, so in the city of Portland, there was no problem. There was one coffee shop, Aroma Joe's, that needed a phone call, and since then, no problem. The mayor of South Portland is an acquaintance of mine. I asked her, she said no problems.
Matthew, do you have an exemption for fees with anybody on like food stamps or that kind of a program?
No, and we talked about that in Portland, and Councilor Suslovic said it's important that we don't divide, in his opinion, like kind of choose winners and losers. Everyone, regardless of their income, gets to, for instance, participate in the nickel on the bottle bills for returnable bottles. Everyone pays taxes, and if you go to Portland, say the Bayside, Hannaford, you'll see our newest citizens, immigrants from all over, no problems. Everyone they know, they just bring something to put stuff in. I think it's important that everyone participate. And I don't think it's a hardship to bring something. You know, it could be anything from a pickle bucket to a backpack, to a used bag, to carry your groceries home in.
Yes, those are kind of words that Matthew just shared, or what your council might need to hear so they don't mull it over. I think we did, but that whole, universal concept, it's very good to remember those that kind of rationale when you propose this.
Well, luckily we have a council member with us here, so he can relay it back to everyone else.
Nobody listens to me.
All right. I have another question. How did people come about to some of the definitions that were used? Particularly for me, I was curious about the thickness of the plastic bags, and what kind of either research or benchmarking, what is too thin and what is too thick. From this conversation, I heard 4 mil would be sort of a progressive high approach, but I like to have backup when someone says, why did you choose 2.5 or 3 mil or 5 mil or 4 mil? And I was just curious what people's experience was with that.
I can't help you with that. We didn't do that in Portland or in Cape. Sorry.
We do have something in our definition of a reusable bag means that it meets all the criteria. So we just defined the reusable bag being 4 mil thicknesses. We didn't define, I think this is Kimberly's genius. We did not define the single-use thin film thickness.
Okay.
Chelsea, do you have copies of all our ordinances? That
not on this, not right in front of me. If I were to get it, I'd have to, this whole screen would go away. But Saco and I think South Portland, maybe not, have, so historically in the United States, many of the ordinances that describe single-use plastic bags originally had chosen any bag that's less than 2.25 mils, and that's where we've talked about multiple times throughout this call that that's where that sort of loophole is that some retailers will then substitute for a 3 mil bag, which is still a pretty thin plastic bag. So but more ordinances in Maine that do define it are using the 4 mil because 4 mil is considered reusable, because I think Kathy, you had mentioned or someone had mentioned about like when you go to the mall, like South Portland Mall, a lot of those stores will give you that thicker bag for your clothes, and people may tend to reuse that more than a single-use plastic bag, or a thin film plastic bag. So that sort of mil thickness ranges in these ordinances if they detail them between 2.25 mils and 4 mils of what's considered reusable and what's considered not reusable, or thin film versus not thin film.
I think the idea is that you want to make it thick enough that it's too expensive to give away for free.
Yeah, right, exactly.
You don't want them to just make slightly thicker bags that are now going into the waste stream. You want them to not give away the bags.
Exactly.
I've noticed that many of the bags are made from recyclable materials. But my question is, and people have been asking me, can you recycle reusable bags after they've worn out? And
Generally not all of them. At least that's some of the research I found. It's hard to get it on both ends, to have it made from recyclables and then itself to be recyclable. I'm more interested in how many more businesses can we get to have them make in this country? Because if you look at every single tag on the grocery stores that they sell the reusable bags, they're all made elsewhere. And they keep it that way. I asked Hannaford that. I said, why don't you can you carry more bags that are made in the US? And they said, look, we just can't get the cost down to make it an effective reusable bag program. So
I apologize. I need to sign off because the school bus will be here any second. But great to meet all of you. And please let me know if there are other questions I can answer by email.
Thank you, Kara.
Thanks for organizing, Chelsea.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kara.
So folks in Rockland, did you have another question?
Yeah.
Maybe not at the moment, no.
Okay.
If I could add one more thing, Ed Suslovic was the Portland City Council that worked with our Green Packaging Task Force, and he's a great guy. He's been around a long time. And some of the advice he gave us was when we were struggling with who to include and who not to include, he said, sometimes when you try to get everything, you get nothing. And he pointed out, like, if you've been in Maine long enough, you know that the bottle bill came about I think passed in 1974 or 75, and that the people of Maine have voted at least twice to keep it, and not only keep it, but to add on to it. So we've added on things like wine and liquor bottles and juice bottles, I think, over the years, and made it stronger and stronger. And he said that can be a template for bags, and we can add things on. Once we've established this, we can show that it works. We can add on to it. You don't need to try to do everything at once. Mm-hmm. And once people get used to it, they'll be more open to changes that make it stronger, perhaps. Yeah. So when in the 70s, when we started the bottle bill, there were a lot of people that said, this will never work. The sky is falling. You can't do this to the retailers. Small businesses will go out of business, et cetera, et cetera. And it turns out that none of those things happen, and it works great, and the people of Maine love it, and have voted at least twice to keep it. And another one would be the ban on smoking in bars and restaurants in Portland. And people said, this is impossible. The bars and restaurants will go out of business. No one will want to go out anymore. And and it turns out that exactly the opposite happened, and that once the smoking ban was implemented, more and more people went to bars and restaurants, and their business improved. So that was his advice: is to maybe start small and build.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think to add to that, you're always going to have opposition, and things always seem worse when they're just an idea. When it comes to adopting new ordinances like this that, are really to benefit the greater good. And so I think, as we've seen just case by case, things always seem worse as an idea than when they're implemented, and people have to go grocery shopping, and they're going to do what's convenient, and then they're just going to deal with, whatever changes need to come in place there. So I think, I feel like you're always going to have naysayers, but I think that, like Matthew said, you can always start small and grow larger. And I think that's where the importance in education and outreach comes in, of showing what the successes are and giving people real buy-in into why this ordinance worked and why it could be stronger. And if you want to just start with a fee and move to a ban later, you can show, this is the benefit we've had, and this is the greater benefit that we could have by banning bags, or doing whatever the next step is to make the ban make the ordinance stronger.
Well, here's something that we could possibly encourage. There's one supermarket in Waterville that already charges a fee for plastic bags, but they also provide cardboard boxes near the checkout area. So if someone doesn't want to buy a bag, they could pick up a free cardboard box that had canned goods or produce or whatever and take their shopping home in the cardboard box.
Yeah, I mean, if you've ever gone to like a Sam's Club or a Costco, although you're buying in bulk, that's some of the tactics that they use there because they don't give bags either. So I think that's a really good idea, and it also gives a new life to something that would just be discarded right away to the recycling at the retailer. So
one thing to keep in mind with that is that over the years, the large stores have gotten savvy to the value of cardboard. It's down at the moment, but many of the large stores actually have purchased their own balers, and they actually bale and sell their own cardboard. So just to go into that conversation, recognizing that there may be a built-in revenue stream for various stores by actually them taking care of their own large quantities of cardboard.
Well, if anyone has anything else to add, now would be the time. I think the Zoom actually turns off at the time limit, and we have about 4 minutes left.
Chelsea, I just wanted to mention to everybody that we do have a pretty good inventory of reusable bags. I think, Stu, you may have already taken advantage of that.
Thank you very much. We gave away every one of them.
Great. So Xander and folks in Rockland, you know, we would be happy to also donate a box of reusable bags for you to support your implementation when you get to that point. So just be
great,
aware.
thank you.
I'm trying to think we could do at the food pantry kind of thing. Just give them away there, or have them, you know, even if it's the city.
I think we're all set. This has been super helpful, guys, and it's just another sort of way of us to do our due diligence on this and feel prepared when we reach out to the greater community and approach council with this. So it's been really useful for us.
Fantastic.
It's been really good for me too, and thank you so much for organizing this webinar.
Yeah, thanks for participating. I'm glad everyone was involved, and you'll get a copy of this soon to review, and I'll follow up with the information about the bag collection at the different retailers, and I'll also follow up with a list maybe of everyone's the speaker's contact information for you folks in Rockland and Waterville. If you want to reach out to more resources, that's another benefit. And I was hoping everyone would get out of this is some resources to chat with as you're writing your ordinance, and just a network of folks to reach out to.
Chelsea, do you have a sense of when this might go up so that we can share it with the folks that couldn't attend?
I will probably I will get the recording together right as soon as we finish this, send it out to everybody to review. Some folks may want their voices omitted or parts of what they say omitted for whatever reason, and then I'll omit that, and then I'll send out another copy that'll be for distribution to whomever.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone.
Rockland and Waterville, if there's ever anything we can do, don't hesitate.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure, thanks. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well.
Quick, bye.
Bye. Bye.